Hey there, here we are. I've this kilt was brought to me by an old friend. He's had it for quite a long time. I think he's had it since school, so quite a few years. And so I'm to give it an alteration because, of course, over 30 years this figure's changed somewhat. It's just, I think, a matter of 4 inches at the waist and the hip, so which is not unexpected. So what I've done is, first stage, I took out the canvas, the lining, the top band, pressed both aprons flat. You can still see there's a slight ghost of a couple of the creases, but I think the next press will deal with that. No, I've just mocked this up because his new measurements are waist 39, hip 43, which is smaller than me. And so I'd undone the aprons, and then I've measured the width across the back at waist and hip. We have 18.5 and 21.5, which is fortuitous because then our apron can be 21, 22. So I've temporarily pinned up the inside apron just to see what I'm working with. Because again, remember, I make the inside apron just a little bit longer so that there's cloth backing the strap when we do the thing up. This, in this case, doesn't leave a very deep apron pleat. It's only about 3.5 inches, but that's what it's giving me. And at the end, we have, again, about 3.5 inches for the fold over. But that's not necessarily a problem because we're going to have a heavy canvas backing here. On the outer apron, it's a little bit more generous because the white line is centered, so we have what looks like about 6 inches here and a decently deep apron pleat on this side. It's just irritating that we've got a proper depth one on one side and a very shallow one on the other, but we go with what we have. I spent a little while just looking at this and wondering if it was worth the time to rob a pleat on either side, because of course if we rob a pleat we lose 5/8 of an inch on either side, but we gain 6 inches on either side. The only reason for doing that, we'd have to make the apron a little bit wider, but again, from a military background, a military kilt, and a proper kilt, in my opinion, the apron is at least and usually more than 50% of the total. So I'm still thinking about that, right? Whether I'm going to rob a pleat on either side. One of the first things I did, because I would call this a mid-quality kilt, a mid-grade kilt for some aspects of it. I mean, the sewing is perfect. The cloth is wonderful. What I don't like is that the buckles are rather cheap. I think I'm just going to replace these buckles and not say anything because they're not particularly good quality. The tongue hangs up, as you can see. It wedges itself open. So I think I'll use a better set of buckles. I've got lots of buckles. I can do that. Now he wants to keep this third buckle low on the right hip, and as I've said elsewhere, this is sort of a vestigial survival of an older style of kilt where there was only 2 buckles on one side. This, in my opinion at least, this doesn't really do much, but he wants to keep it, so we will. But I question the location of this thing. It seems rather high, and I don't know why it's so far back. So when I call him in for an interim fitting halfway, because I think it should be down here. It should be pretty much in line with this one, right? But it should be down here. I think what I will do when I call him in for a fitting is I will temporarily fit it there, sew it on there, and then see what difference it makes if at all, in how the kilt hangs. Certainly it's going to look better because that's just in a silly location as far as I'm concerned. The pleating's well done, and again, one thing I've learned to do, because sometimes you don't notice it until too late, that they haven't, well, I'm going to call it messed up. They've messed up the how the pleats are arranged. And sometimes they do the older method, which I saw recently, where they started at the pattern where it was at the end of the left-hand edge of the outer apron, and then just start pleating it from there. This one is, to my opinion, properly pleated. And the way I did that was I put my finger, I count in from the outside pleats, and with each pleat, so starting from last pleat on left and right, I look at each to see that they're the same. Okay, this one's centered white, blue, green, black, green, blue, white, blue, green, black, green, blue, centered on the white. So they've done a proper job there. Good for them. That sounded patronizing or patronizing. Not the case. They did a proper job there. He wants to keep the sporran strap loops, even though strictly speaking they're not necessary, but he wants to keep them, so we will. What annoys me is that these things, the buckles aren't sewn through and through to the canvas. They're just sewn to the cloth, and that isn't best practice by any means. Looking on the inside, they used a pinking shears to cut all of the and that must have been time consuming, because pinking shears are rather fragile, and I don't think you can really use them very quickly. But be that as it may, if I do decide to rob a pleat on either side, I look at the next pleat. This is rather curious because this hasn't been sewn down here. I think I'm going to fix that. That there's just, you can see right here, there's just enough cloth that if we rob a pleat and this becomes the buttonhole, there is enough cloth there so when we sew the lining in again. So there's something to think about. The steeking is properly done. Yeah, and when we look at the inside, the pleats aren't completely regular, but that's because of the vagaries of the tartan. The distance, I'm not exactly sure how to concisely quantify that, but we can see, okay, that black is rather narrow, the green is rather wide, we get a couple of narrows, but it doesn't mean they've done it incorrectly. They've been dealing with the set, the tartan design actually sort of imposed that upon them. What I didn't like, and what I'm laughing at still, is the canvas job, because they had done the typical thin strip of canvas between the two buckles, but they haven't sewn the buckles to the canvas. Waste. The apron canvases were not attached to the center canvas at all. So yeah, cargo kilt making. The purpose of this is to provide a belt, a continuous belt, and putting it in three separate pieces is frankly worse than useless. I think it's just because people aren't looking down the road how long their kilt can last if it's properly made. So we're going to put a proper canvassing in here. I also notice that the lining, sure, we've got the hole for the buttonhole, which is competently sewn, but we also have this, and I have no idea what that's about, because it seems to line up with that cutout. So I have no idea what's going on there, and frankly, I'm not going to think about it too much. So this gets thrown into the scrap bag. In my next stage, I'm going to unpin these. I'm going to take the buckles off. I am going to mark them, because you can see this one's been moved. Some of this is some very good detail. You can see how they've arranged I call this the tab, the cloth tab that the buckle mounts to, or mounts the buckle to the kilt. You can see that this has been moved over because the original person was actually quite artistic and quite good standards. They sewed this so that this would be camouflaged against that. So this has been moved back. So we're going to move that back to where it should be. This looks like it originally used to be down here or even here. So this isn't a mistake. Just looking at that, there's our clue. This wasn't made by the original kilt maker. Somebody altered the kilt. Now, I'm not sure how many hands this has passed through before it came to him, or what alterations were done when it was on his watch. But we're going to move that. That's just showing me that it was there, and that's where we're going to move it back. We'll take this off as well. This originally looked like it was a bit farther forward. I may not be able to match that because we don't want the buckle too close to the buttonhole. We want it back just a little bit because otherwise the strap doesn't lay right. Okay, so from here, those come off. I'm going to put in the canvas and carry on. So with luck, by end of day today, it's what, 8 o'clock in the morning. I have a few errands to run. And frankly, let's face it, I get restless after a while. So I'll spend some time at the bench and I'll go out and do something else. For just as a break, I'll do some other chore. So by end of day today, I plan to have the canvas inner apron shaped, buckles sewn, return to their correct locations, outer apron may not shape. I might just baste it to the lining so that when I call them in for a fitting midweek, I can hang it off of them. And let's see if I can actually record that. We'll see if he'll consent to that. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking to you, and I'm going to get to work after another cup of coffee.